Thank you everyone for joining and welcome to our webinar. We're going to talk today about how you can utilize artificial intelligence to drive a seamless traveler experience. I have with me George Rokus and Aditya. George is from Hudson Crossing, and I'm sure many of you may already know of him or know him. He is an industry expert that consults around various areas in the travel and hospitality industry. And George, you want to do a quick intro before we go ahead?
Sure. As you just said, I'm a partner with Hudson Crossing. We've been consultants to the travel industry for a little over 15 years, and very interested in helping to tee this off by painting a little bit of a picture of just how devastating COVID has been to the travel industry over the last couple of years and how suppliers are ready to respond.
And thanks, George. We have Aditya, who's the CEO of First Hive, who will talk to the criticality of CDP and how it can help you enable that traveler experience. Aditya, do a quick intro yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Ranjit. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. And the founder CEO of First Hive. First Hive, as some of you may be aware, is today recognized as one of the most comprehensive customer data platforms in the world. Travel, tourism, hospitality is one of the industry verticals that probably will see one of the most meaningful impacts of a CDP deployment because it centers hugely around experience. And that is really what a true CDP should deliver for an enterprise, which is how do you accelerate experience? So look forward to talking more about it.
Thanks, Aditya. So as George mentioned, we'll have George starting off giving you that industry perspective and talking to what is next for the industry a little bit as well in terms of coming back from COVID, like he said. It'll be followed by Aditya. Aditya will give you a little bit of an overview about how a CDP can play a role in actually achieving that objective. And I'll talk to you at the end and we'll have a discussion, take your questions around putting it all together and what role AI plays in this whole experience scheme of things. George, over to you.
Well, we were trying to figure out the best way to show some of the impacts on the supplier universe and travel and decided that there was, excuse me, so much, we'd pack it into a couple of concept maps, which I hope are going to be a little bit easier to follow. Just looking along the lines at the top here, COVID accelerated the trend towards video conferencing. And it's not that video conferencing wasn't working all over the world, but the applications like GoToMeeting and WebEx basically were awful. And they were enterprise applications being sold to procurement people who really didn't care about user interface. So if you wanted to use one, you needed to get a PhD in using WebEx. But with new entrants like Zoom and Teams, those had a very strong effect in displacing the business travel demand. And you, I'm sure, remember when COVID first came out and nobody knew what was going on, travel just stopped. And because of that, we had to explore other alternatives. Video conferencing was right there. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. The second relationship there, going through the metaverse for business. I know many of you are wincing right now thinking, oh God, he's going to do a crypto pitch. I promise I'm not. Metaverse for business is totally legit. The bigger players in metaverse like Meta and Microsoft have poured literally tens of billions of dollars per year into developing metaverse products for business. They are still in a nascent stage. They're still not mainstream, just testing, but they are getting really good. And I've seen some of the experience reports from people who've tried them. And if you can imagine putting on the VR glasses and then being in a room with other people who are coincidentally not there, but just present through their VR glasses. You have a range of computers and capabilities, whiteboards that you can walk up to and draw on with your finger or a stylus. It's a very interesting experience that people are really saying some very positive things about. So this is further down the line, but I think you may have read recently that Meta told its senior executives, that would be Zuck and his direct reports, that they could now live anywhere in the world, and many have gone to other countries. So they are really eating their own dog food and trying to see if, even at the highest level, these metaverse for business products are going to be displacing even more business travel. And finally, COVID hit everybody, with the exception of a couple of then lucky, not so lucky folks like Peloton and other companies that really benefited from people being stuck at home. For the most part, corporate profits were very depressed, which then, just because there wasn't money, even if you could get on a plane, depressed business travel demand even further. All of these things dramatically reduce profitability for supplier brands because, as everybody in travel knows, business travel is much more profitable than leisure travel. On the leisure side, you have lots of people who are simply looking for the lowest price, whereas the business traveler needs to be someplace by a particular time, wants to stay in a hotel that's near the office. Those sorts of things make them much more price elastic. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit more of an eye chart, excuse me, but I think it's pretty simple to follow if you just look it through. Supplier brands realize that they need to engage some recovery strategies. Losing all that business travel really changed a lot of people's minds. God bless the folks at Delta. They are still putting their heads down and charging forth and claiming they're going to reclaim their former glory with business travel. But for many others, I think they've finally assented to the idea that they're going to have to go after leisure travel. Now, typically, leisure travel has been significantly, or the majority of it, again, has been those people who are trying to find the very lowest price, and suppliers use them to backfill demand when there were holes. But now the suppliers want to go after premium leisure, and there is a fair amount of that out there. It's just a little bit harder to find, and those people demand more than the folks who were willing to fly on Spirit Airlines and get the seat on the outside of the aircraft above the tail. Other recovery strategies are looking very hard at personalization. I am one of those people who complains about going to the same hotel again and again and again and having them at the desk say, "Have you ever stayed with us before?" Honestly, I just don't know why that has to be, but my accumulated 25 years of experience in the travel industry tells me that personalization for suppliers is, Shakespeare said, a custom honored more in the breach than the observance. They just don't do it. I still get emails where they say, "Here are some carefully selected offers just for you." And honestly, I have no idea why anyone would think that those offers were selected for me. So if there is a method to the madness for personalization in the past, I can't figure it out. And I have not been able to get anybody else to explain it to me. So I'm going to go with it hasn't really been there. The only place where it has somewhat been there is on demand generation. I do think that there are some people who are segmenting their base and trying to send out something that they feel is an offer that has a higher propensity of being selected than others, but very weak. This is an area where we will have to get much, much better. Personalization also improves conversion. If that offer really is tailored for me, I have a lot higher opportunity or likelihood of buying it. And then if I get a couple of those offers and they make sense for me and I realize that vendor X seems to know my preferences better than others, well, that's going to improve my retention and lifetime value as well. In addition to trying to boost the funnel and go after the right customers, the next thing is to try and improve margins at the room or flight. And hotels are coming newly into the fray with attribute-based shopping that will help them, or attribute-based selling, that will help them improve the margins on attributes within the room. They're also selling ancillaries, which are things that could be in the hotel outside the room, like having a bottle of wine or some flowers put in your room, or hooking you up with the on-site spa. And then there are non-room and lifestyle sales like theater tickets and restaurant reservations and so forth. All of these things boost the higher average booking and help towards profit recovery. And finally, those are all above the line items. Below the line is trying to figure out how to reduce costs. Distribution costs have been high for ages, certainly higher than the airlines have wanted. They've been very aggressive about trying to reduce distribution costs. Hotels historically have not been all that concerned about it, which is why some OTAs have been totally willing to come in and eat their lunch and try and bring more people in through these very expensive travels channels. So the effort there is in trying to get more direct booking channels. Have them come into your voice channel, your supplier.com channel, your mobile app, places where you don't have to spend a lot of money to get that booking. All of these things taken together will improve profit recovery. Next slide, please. So in summary, obviously there are many keys to profit recovery. Some of the bigger ones are in the previous slide. With business travel declining, suppliers know what has to be done, and they also are aware that technology is the way out. Business in the travel industry is getting way too complicated for us to be handling things manually. Gone are the days when you can take reservations on a fax line. Gone are the days when you can, well, almost gone are the days when you'll assign rooms at the property. Things have to change. Technology has to be providing a way out, but it has to be smart technology. So how do we get there? We need to bring in systems that'll help us identify our customers and put together comprehensive profiles. If you want to personalize, you have to know who the person is and what they want, what they like. You need to be able to match that with attractive, personalized offers, and it has to be across all channels. We have to let the customers come to us however they want and be ready to respond to them with an offer that actually is a good invitation for their business. And creating all of these special content and offers on our direct channels should go down. And I realize this is not a today thing, but ultimately we want to go down to the individual level. Segment levels are fine, and they will be applicable for quite a few years to come. But boy, when I can get to that individual level and get something that really resonates with me as a unique individual, that's when you're going to lock in my business. And with that, I'll now hand it over to Adi.
Thank you, George. Before Aditya comes in, thanks for setting that context. And I think that individual stage is the nirvana stage, but I think Aditya can cover how we start off on that journey to getting to that segment of one. Aditya, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Ranjit. George, that was a really good setup of the context. I think before I step into the slides, one of the things that you said, which is it's when you can talk to me as an individual that you got my money, right? You can lock in my money. I think that really is the essence of where all of us as consumers today are moving towards. I mean, if you look at any brand relationship that is going to be a sustainable, growing, positive experience relationship, it is anchored in a high quality experience rooted in trust. And for that trust to happen, the best way that an enterprise can demonstrate that it's a trustworthy custodian of your relationship, your data, and everything else is by, at the very least, showing that it recognizes you as who you are and then has a conversation rather than putting you as part of a broadcast bucket of common information going to everybody else. And that's a very, very easy dipstick test on whether the brand is actually having conversations or you're just part of a list. Right? And that really is the biggest difference in the expectation of consumers as well today. Consumers expect recognition of themselves as an individual in the conversation, and they reward brands which do that. And so completely agree with you. And hopefully, over the next couple of slides, I'll touch upon some of the things that need to get done, and it's possible today, despite all of the complexity enterprises have to deal with. And it's a complex world. It's an extremely siloed, distributed world of what they're dealing with. And how do we help them navigate through all of this chaotic landscape that they have to deal with on the technology side? So yeah, so Ranjit, maybe if you can go to the next slide. Uh, every enterprise, including travel, tourism, hospitality enterprises today, deal with every one of these challenges or objectives, which is, look, I have multiple systems. I have my booking management system. We have a website. We have customer care. We have chat bots. We have OTA feeds that are coming in. So many different places where consumer breadcrumbs or information is spread out. And then because not all of these are necessarily we're in a few extreme cases, even if you have the same email ID, they can't recognize you. That's a different thing. But in some cases, we're not always walking in with our PI on our sleeve before we have a conversation, which means that some of these are anonymous interactions. We have different identifiers for our business travel and leisure travel. So even if you're there at the same property or a same service provider, because your persona is different, are they able to connect and say this is the same you? And for the brand to make sure that it is being consistent and efficient in conversing with you, uh, there is a lot of operational overhead at the marketing ops side. A lot of different systems where manually data has to be downloaded, uploaded, work has to happen on Excel, campaigns are being sent out, multiple systems are being managed in what has evolved to being a multi-headed hydra for these enterprises. And therefore, it's natural that uh, there are limitations to how much real time, how much personalization can be brought in into these conversations. And and there are different teams. There are different specialized teams dealing with different channels. That's one of the constraints that the enterprise has to deal with, which is their internal org structures, which sometimes also lend themselves to complexity on collaboration, federated data access to all of these different teams, and so on. So and all of this, of course, has to be done within the guardrails of privacy compliance. How do you do all of this and still ensure that you are able to deliver a meaningful traveler experience? And that's really where the customer data platform comes in. So when you look at all of the, when we step back and look at all of the typical kind of system sources of data or objectives that the enterprise is dealing with, whether you look at it from an acquisition and nurture of consumer standpoint, which is where, all of those mails that get sent out to us as part of their campaign tools or emailing tools or any automation that we do, or even on the website as we move towards, the post cookie world, how does all of that kind of still continue to enable a good traveler experience to the entire potentially the whole online reputation management, the social media management, or the transaction systems where you have CRMs, you have data lakes, and you have ERPs and your front office systems. How does all of this kind of come together is something that is fundamental to the value that a customer data platform adds. So any customer data platform essentially translates this distributed system landscape that an enterprise has, where every tool has its own automation capability or its own data management capability, transforms that to one where essentially you come in with now a single central system of intelligence, which is able to consolidate all of that insight. And how the product really does it is, through connecting into all of these different tools and systems, whether it is your transaction systems, your storage systems, your systems of conversations like your chatbots and customer care systems. And from all of these integrations, it ingests all of the data and the insights that are getting generated at that point in time, connects all of that into this single central first party identity layer, which is where all of the consent backed information comes in. All of that gets connected to now give the service provider that single view to who this consumer is, what the consumer intent has been, what is the consumer's journey with me been. And therefore, questions like, have you ever stayed with us? Can I go away right out of the window there? Because now you can actually see the entire lifetime engagement that the consumer has had with you as a brand, irrespective of which channel the consumer has engaged with you. And every channel or every touch point is now enriched with the universal information of this consumer's engagement. That means that you are now able to bring to fore the insights that have been generated across all of these different places and ensure that every interaction is personalized and is contextualized with all that information behind you. And you're not doing it just on the basis of what is happening now or what has happened in the same channel with that limited information. So you're essentially allowing enterprises to move from being channel centric to really consumer focused or traveler focused by bringing all that insight and intelligence to the fore. What the CDP also then does is then to make sure that all of this data is available for consumption, which means that whether it is the next email that needs to go out, the next personalization that needs to go out, whether it is the next call that gets answered, all of these are now this it's possible to control all of that from this single place, which is the first type CDP, where you're now able to deliver connected journeys and connected campaigns. So what would have otherwise been disconnected independent channels and independent tools delivering these transform into a single brain that's now orchestrating the traveler experience across all of these different tools and channels. And what that means is that while there is still all of the edge enhancements or the edge capabilities that will be leveraged, you're not having ball drops because it's a single brain that's now delivering the external interfacing of the brand to the traveler rather than every tool for itself or every channel for itself. So you don't have to do a 0 to 1 start stop as you switch channels. You're really now talking to a single organism rather than the elephant and the seven blind men touching and feeling different parts of that organism, right? Yeah, Ranjit, next slide. So essentially, I mean, there are lots of different places that you can kind of bring in the traveler experience enhancement with the CDP behind you, where it of course starts from the ability to bring together and see that single identity, because now you're able to get to better segments, you're able to service your inbound customer service requests better, you're able to enable your front office better, you're able to enable your web personalization better, you're able to ensure that there's better offline to online conversational connect, because what happens in one channel is not left there, it's then absorbed and those insights are portable across the organization. And a couple more areas that I want to just kind of highlight before I hand it back to you, Ranjit, if you can go to the next slide. Right. So as we take care of the first foundational capabilities, which is around identity, segmentation, the ability to orchestrate and personalize, what really then starts happening is I would imagine a pretty transformation, a big transformation on the experience side, because now you are not just looking at automation or you're not just looking at personalization, but you're really able to independently personalize at scale for every individual at a time. So you may have multiple customer journeys defined, but every customer is experiencing that journey at their pace in their context. And that is where it starts transforming itself to a movement centered personalization experience. And that is where the exceptional experience starts getting delivered, and then you are able to orchestrate this across tools, so you don't have to have this tool switching challenge. And the CDP really allows you to orchestrate this from that central place. And finally, to the loyalty piece. Now we know that travel, tourism, hospitality vertical is very vested and big on loyalty. But one of the things that a lot of us have seen is that loyalty programs today, in today's world, cannot just be transactional programs, but it has to go back to that that trust, which is you can demand loyalty from a consumer when you are able to demonstrate loyalty to the consumer, and the biggest way you demonstrate loyalty to the consumer is to first ensure that you are able to acknowledge and recognize them as an individual that they are, and then respect their independent space and their conversations. You cannot have loyalty with a stranger, and that's really the biggest transformation that happens as you start deploying the CDP. You start identifying, you start making sense of the consolidated breadcrumbs that are available. You then start utilizing all of these insights at every conversation that is available, so that you transform every interaction into an experience. And as you start doing that, you are now able to demonstrate your loyalty to the consumer, and thereby triggering the consumer's loyalty to you as a brand. And that really how all of this connects to me as the transformation of the traveler experience becomes front and center for the service provider. Yeah. So all of the other things, whether it is segment of one, the ability to drive emotional equity, or the capability to capture intent, and all of those then become the necessary. They're all part of that goal that we have, which is to ensure that we are now able to capture, and we are able to ensure that there is portability of the data and insights across the organism of the enterprise. And there is now that single central system of intelligence that's allowing the enterprise to orchestrate it. So you can potentially have a million conversations in parallel, each one personalized and hyper personalized to that individual, and happening at that pace, all happening orchestrated through a single data platform. Even if there are multiple channels and multiple edge tools which are actually delivering that experience as part of this orchestration. That's kind of primarily what I had, Ranjit. There are a few more things, but then we'll probably talk about it as we come back. So over to you at this point.
Thank you, Aditya. Perfect. I think that sets me up for what I wanted to talk about next as well. So if we look at what George said in terms of the industry imperatives, obviously driving profit recovery is a prime objective right now for the industry coming out of COVID. Now, we also have to correlate that to the fact that traditional way we've managed traveler interactions with the loyalty program as sort of the foundational element will have to undergo a transformation, in our opinion. The reason being that most of our loyalty programs in the industry have been structured around transactions, like Aditya said, and like George was alluding to, around business travel, because that's where the frequency of travel came in. And that's where the loyalty element stuck because of it was correlated back to the frequency of travel. But when it comes to the leisure segment and the premium leisure segment, obviously that's going to change because you are not going to have the frequency of travel, but you're going to have to look at how do I retain this customer and have them come back when they are going to do maybe 3-4 vacations a year rather than travel every other week that you would see in business travel. So keeping that in mind, how do we sort of leverage a platform like the First Hive CDP, which obviously from what Aditya mentioned, you will see that technology today is not the limiting factor. It is what we do with it and how do we meet our objectives that's what's really going to make a difference, in our opinion. With that in mind, let's look at artificial intelligence and the traveler experience and look at what should your journey look like in the current times. Today, if you look at it, and it's today's traveler, a lot of these things might seem futuristic, but I can assure you from an expectation standpoint, this is what today's traveler expects. And let's go through the various cycles that we as travelers go through when we look at a travel, end-to-end travel journey. So we start with plan. And during the plan phase, what we are looking at, especially from a leisure traveler perspective, is what can I do? What are my options? How am I going to come up with those options? And in that context, having the CDP implemented, integrated back to your loyalty program, knowing what historically you have done as a traveler, plus the non-PII interactions, if you're able to integrate back in terms of what have you been searching for when you're trying to plan, right? if you as an enterprise can combine all of that information and then proactively offer trip suggestions. So like, I'll give you an example. I mean, George gave the example of walking into a hotel and having been asked, "Have you lived here before?" Right? I have another perspective where there is a pattern pre-COVID that every summer we did a beach destination as a family outside of my business travel, and I did all of that with one hotel brand and one airline brand. And I'll not name them, not to put them on the spot, but essentially, I've never had either of them come back proactively before my summer vacation planning to say, here are your next beach destinations that you should travel to, given the fact that you've stayed with us in these places or flown with us to those places. So those are some of the possibilities I think that are there by leveraging the CDP platform along with additional technology elements over and above that. Once you're during the planning phase, sort of correlated to that, you're also exploring your options, right? So when I'm looking at destinations, can a travel company not provide me? And I say travel company because, depending on whom I'm engaging with, and I'm a direct to supplier booker. Having been in the industry for a while, I think it's fair on my part to do it direct because it gives me a lot more flexibility and all of that. The events that I do typically a lot of times are booked through the hotel or the resort destinations that I'm at, so they have access to that data. Can one of my travel providers provide me with a curated itinerary? So that's something that we could do with the richness of information available and applying algorithms over and above that information. The next part that I do is search. One of the primary areas where I actually go out of the supplier platforms and go back into meta search sort of environment with Google Travel or one of the others. One valuable information I see from Google is, a pricing trend prediction, especially when it comes to my flights, right? Am I above the average price? Am I looking at a trend of this price going up? I don't see any reason why a travel supplier could not provide that information from their perspective as well. It does aid, and I'm looking at all of these as aspects that would make me feel like I trust the brand more. To Aditya's point, in terms of where does it really start? It starts with trust, and all of these elements build that trust for me. Now, in the booking phase and managing the booking in the pre-travel sort of segment, one area that I think there should be increased focus on, but that should not be the only area that you're focused on, right? Is primarily around cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Now, when George talked to the industry context and talked about ancillaries or attribute-based selling when it comes to hospitality, these are the ones that really help you drive profitability, because the profitability levels of these, as you know, are much higher than your core product. Secondly, when you view upsell and cross-sell opportunities, are you looking at only starting with an unbundling concept, which has been around for a while, or are you looking at things like, what can I do with partners? What can I do in terms of enhancing activity sales or experience sales? Those are the kind of attributes. Now, the how and where AI can play a role in some of this is around not only knowing your preferences and doing it, but in today's day and age of the metaverse, like George spoke about, are you able to do immersive experience-based selling when it comes to experiences and ancillaries, right? For example, if someone who's never done snorkeling before and I'm at a beach destination, can you give me a VR headset to tell me what that snorkeling experience would really be like, right? Are you able to leverage that sort of immersive experience to sell your ancillaries? Perhaps that's something to look at as well. Now, coming to the travel phase, right? Today, most travel applications, whether it's an airline app or a hotel app, have the standard vanilla integrations into Uber or Lyft or one of the other taxi providers, a rideshare or taxi app. But can we not go beyond that? Applying machine learning algorithms along with all the rich information that is available outside of the profile, right? What are the weather conditions on your drive to the airport? What are the traffic patterns currently that are in existence? Is your incoming flight coming on time? Integrate all of that and actually proactively say, based on this and based on your previous preferences of whether you book an Uber or a Lyft or you have a taxi service, can we not proactively then, have that booking made for the traveler? So that's another way to start engaging at a level where you are essentially looking at doing it proactively rather than having them click on something and have to figure out when to schedule it. Now, during the travel, there are multiple elements where artificial intelligence can play a role, and where the personal information that you have consented to provide the enterprise can be leveraged very successfully. Now, as we all know, COVID has accelerated the whole contactless piece of the self-service interaction, right? In terms of that, and the combination of the fact that the industry is so starved when it comes to staffing today, in terms of having adequate amount of staff to support your consumer interactions. So we did an exercise where we went to a couple of airports and then we looked at the car rental counters, and the snaking queues that we saw were a reflection of how the staffing challenges have worked, along with the change in pattern where rather than having a Monday and Thursday as a peak load, Friday and Sunday has become a peak load at the car rental industry as a reflection of the shift to leisure travel to start with. Now, in that context, having an experience where you are able to provide a contactless experience as well as a self-service experience powered by digital identity using facial recognition, going into automated checkout of the car, using computer vision, for instance, to look at damage detection when the car is returned, compare it to the view of the car when it was first checked out. All of that combined enables you to give that seamless experience where the customer doesn't face the bottleneck, the traveler doesn't face the bottleneck of being in line for 30 minutes to get a car, right? And similar concept applies across, whether it comes to your stay, whether it comes to your airport check-in, and all of that, right? The second aspect, again, Aditya alluded to the fact that it all starts with recognition, right? And we all crave that. For me personally, when it comes to the fact that, just having an acknowledgement of my experience that last time I traveled with an airline or stayed with a hotel makes a significant difference, right? And I must tell you, our level of expectation from travel companies have hit such a level. There was an instance where I landed after an international flight of 20 hours, and I had someone hold up a placard that said, all these people, please come to the baggage counter. And they were going to tell us that our bags didn't make it, right? And I was delighted by that experience because they actually told me before I figured out after waiting for the bag that it didn't turn up. So, it's sort of a reflection of how rock bottom we've set our expectations to be. And that shouldn't be the case, right? So recognizing the travel pattern, recognizing where we have been, what have we engaged with the brand in the past, that's the starting point to delivering that experience. Service recovery becomes another very critical aspect. And all of us have been there. And I remember being in an airport counter, airport gate at one point, and actually thinking, it would have been a good thing if I didn't know too much about the industry, because I had some other person commenting saying, they say there's a mechanical failure. Why can't they just get another aircraft here, right? And those of us who've been in the industry know that it's not as simple as it sounds. But essentially, how you engage with the traveler during a service disruption really defines the trust that a traveler has in you. Now, where does AI play a role, right? We've all been there where reaccommodations are automated, and we look at it from the traveler's elite status and all of that when it comes to an airline disruption. When it shifts to leisure, that equation is going to get a little different. It's not going to be as straightforward as it was when we look at the traditional loyalty elite levels. How do we modify our reaccommodation algorithms to fit that, right? What can we do in terms of helping with standby crew and all of that element that goes into service recovery? Not just that, how do we cascade that information to the future segments of travel, right? If at all, the first flight, outbound flight is the one that has a delay, how do we sort of ensure that that information cascades to the car rental company, to the hotel stay, and who will own that part of the experience for the traveler is the key question that we need to ask ourselves. When it comes to customized preferences, there's several opportunities, starting with understanding your customer, where you can have this. We look at simple things like curated entertainment on a flight, and on the in-flight entertainment or the airline's app. You look at preferences of how you assign a car to a person, not just based on the category, but if I have been a preferred customer or an elite traveler with a car rental company, you know that every single time I've been offered a certain vehicle, I've actually gone and picked another one from the exchange counter. Are you able to reflect that in the next time you assign me a car? When it comes to stay, IoT has really powered the AI algorithm on top of that to be able to set room preferences, right? How well are you able to do some of that? Something to ask ourselves. We talked about destination activities, right? So the destination activities, how are we able to actually customize local partner products that are there? How are we able to sort of sell the experience for a partner, essentially contributing directly to our bottom line, because we are not operationally dealing with that. Again, contributes to the profit recovery element that George had indicated. The post-travel is what is often forgotten, right? When you're looking at a leisure or a premium leisure traveler and looking at retaining them and maximizing the lifetime value, how well are you engaging with them? How well are you managing your reputation among this, class of travelers? We all know that traditionally the service industry has been extremely focused on using word of mouth, right? If we were going to look at, let's say, a cleaning service, we would typically ask other people who use that cleaning service, or a restaurant in your neighborhood. Now, what social media has essentially done is amplified that 1,000-fold. I mean, it's word of mouth times, a certain ratio that has applied to it, right? That's why managing your social interactions and managing your reputation becomes a key in the post-travel segment. And of course, eventually, are you able to capture the experience data from that particular trip and then go back all over again, starting to the plan phase? That's the end nirvana state, which we believe can be delivered through use of AI over and above a CDP platform that's really robust in giving you that profile information. So that's about it that I had. I want to circle back to take questions from the audience. I'll kick off with a couple of questions to George and Aditya to get the discussion rolling. I know it's always tough to be the first person asking the questions. We'll give you a benefit in that one. So George, first one to you. I just want to sort of get your head about what you've been hearing from the industry when you talk to your clients in the industry, which covers, I know, a lot of the big brands out there. What are you hearing in terms of their readiness to adopt CDP and AI to sort of leverage it to give that next generation experience to customers?
I think there's I've never been able to get suppliers to admit that they are way behind what they say they are in terms of personalization. I think the closest I've come to real personalization is that Delta no longer offers me basic economy because I've asked them not to, and it was a checkbox. So that simple rule they seem to be able to follow, but I just don't see that there's been that much actual personalization. I do believe that suppliers are now in a position where, like everybody else in travel, they're more or less forced to come up with new ideas and try new things to recover what they had. A lot of suppliers have gone into a lot of debt just to stay alive. And if they don't do something different, they won't be able to pay off that debt and survive in the future. So I think they are more open now than ever. And the general openness to using third-party technology has never been greater. I can't think of anybody who's developed all of their own or many of their own systems for hotels or accommodations who's not thinking about replacing potentially any of them. With Marriott getting rid of Marcia in favor of the Amadeus system, that was sort of the high water mark. I mean, if they can do it, pretty much anybody can find a reason. So there's a lot more openness to trying new things.
Thanks, Shah. That makes sense. Aditya, in terms of your perspective on what is, I know you covered a ton of roadblocks, but what is the first major roadblock that travel enterprises in particular, have to sort of overcome when it comes to enabling and adopting the first touch CDP and going from there?
Yeah, so I won't necessarily call it a roadblock, Ranjit, because I think one of the things that's happened as we see in the industry is that there is enormous recognition of the shifts in the customer or the traveler experience expectations from
Mm-hmm.
the traveler that most brands today recognize. And therefore, a lot of the enterprises are beyond the stage of do we really need it, and it's now about hey, we need to figure out how to get this right. So I think that would probably have been the biggest roadblock a couple of years
Mm-hmm.
back, not anymore. But I would say one of the most important things for an enterprise to do as they get into this journey is to ask themselves how would they measure success? Because it's very easy to get into a deployment and make it look like yet another technology deployment, whereas a customer
Mm-hmm.
data platform deployment is not just a technology deployment. It's actually an outcome impact deployment, and therefore for a for a choice on a CDP, it makes a lot of difference if the enterprise going in has a view of what success would look like in the first 90 days, first 180 days, first 360 days, and so on. And I think those are important conversations to have, and those are some of the things that we engage with as well.
Thanks, Aditya. And I see questions coming in from the audience as well. The first question we have is one of the factors which is influencing travelers' choice is climate change. Personally, I like airlines and hotels who are caring for the environment. Any insight on this area and how AI can help? Yeah, I'll take that one and I'll ask you to chime in with your views, both of you. So, essentially, absolutely wonderful question because one of the things that's close to our heart personally is sustainability. We are seeing this trend, obviously, where a lot of people care about the choices that they make, right? I think the industry has taken very rudimentary steps. Like, for instance, Google Travel shows you how much carbon emissions are influenced by your booking. Certain supplier sites have started showing that they offer you offset carbon credits. I think there's more serious steps that are being taken in terms of let's say, the car rental industry using, you know, electric vehicles, right? That's a big trend. So how AI can help in some of this? To start with, I think it's about the measuring, which has become easier with IoT and everything. And also after measuring, to then build in predictive algorithms that actually are able to tell you consumption patterns based on uh, variations in certain input parameters, right? So that's the starting point where AI can help. I do believe that carbon credits are not something that is sustainable in the long run. There are only so many trees that we can plant, right? So going from there, so George, Aditya, comments from you on that question in terms of how AI might influence climate change related choices or sustainability?
I do agree that this is an extremely important trend. I think it will only increase, and I think it's also increasing not just for leisure travelers, but for the remaining business travelers as well. A lot of it, though, is really, and it applies to both sustainable travel, where your impact is neutral, to regenerative travel, where your impact in traveling is positive for the place that you're visiting. A lot of it is building awareness, and to the extent that we can have these additional data elements present when you're choosing, to the extent that we can include rules that I only want to see flights that have a particular level of impact or less, or hotels that are regenerative or sustainable in nature. Those help with the shopping process. But really, from the supplier's perspective, it's kind of tough to build up into these states because it takes quite a bit of effort to become better global citizens and reduce your carbon footprint. So I think it'll take a while, but it's definitely a trend we have to try and assist in any way we can.
Thanks,
So
Aditya.
Ran, let me step in to just share an example, right? Let's say I'm somebody who really cares about the fact that I don't need fresh towels every day. I don't mind reusing my towels for 2 days. I don't need all of these, throwaway packaging because it creates a higher footprint, and I want to be more conscious about it. When the housekeeping staff come into my room, if they say, "Hey, Aditya, thank you so much for being so conscious about this," versus a small placard being there saying that, look, we are enforcing a policy, it makes a lot of difference, right? Because in the first one, you are actually being co-created I mean, in the sense that there's an acknowledgement and there is participative acknowledgement in the sense that you are probably being asked, tell me if you want to do this or not. And what we've seen across industries is when consumers are given a choice, a lot of consumers choose the right things. They are very comfortable stepping up and saying, look, I am happy to participate and co-create the joint vision of a better planet, versus that being deployed and then you feel that your choice has been taken away even though you would have done the same thing, right? And this is where it's not just about AI in standalone, but it's AI along with this whole, the
Participative.
ability to use every touch point that you have as not just a transactional touch point. For example, how many of us would have ever looked at the housekeeping staff as a way to deliver some customer experience?
That's true.
Right? It's a transactional layer to the whole thing. But what if they could do something there, right? If you're in the room and they know that you're that kind of a customer who's opted in to do certain thing, maybe there's a physical acknowledgement because that's a high value acknowledgement because it's an in-person acknowledgement.
That's true.
How many in-person acknowledgements do travel, tourism, hospitality players have with a consumer other than the front desk or F&B,
That's true.
right?
True. I think
So,
valuable points.
so,
Yeah.
so the idea is to not look at the machine alone doing it. The machine has to enable every touch point, and that is really where AI can come in, where it understands your persona, it understands what your preferences are, and then it enables translation of that insight into real action through every available method. Hopefully, that
Sounds
sheds
good.
some light.
Yeah, I think we have one question. Aditya, I'm going to direct this one to you, and we may have time for one more question, just opening it up in case someone else wants to ask one. With privacy being such an issue in our society, what should travel companies do when moving into AI solutions with the goal of offering a much more personalized experience? I know I've always said that the line between personalization and creepiness is very fine. I think this relates to that. And Aditya, I know you'll have dealt with this quite a bit.
Right. No, so I think that's a really that's a very pertinent and a very good question, Casey. Thank you for that. Look, often we've and that's driven by real experiences, by the way, over the last few years, right? Where we've seen uh, data uh, risk of sounding a little too strong and harsh, I'll say abuse, right? I mean, data being leveraged, data being abused to drive, let's say, interruption marketing or interruption conversations. I think the thing that, at least from a customer data platform standpoint, I can speak for is that this is the red lines for a customer data platform like First Hive is consent back first party data, which means you're not dealing with non-consent data. That's the number one piece, which this is all first party data, which is with the enterprise and which is allowed by the individual for the enterprise to use for making my experience more meaningful, right? What you're doing with any technology that you use thereafter is essentially to say, because I'm the trusted custodian of this data, I'm going to make sure that I am meaningfully using it to improve your experience, not sending you something. I mean, if you go back to the example that George mentioned earlier, or what Ranjit said, which is, you may be going to the same hotel multiple times, you may be going and doing the same holiday multiple times, but if that is not used, and if every conversation is a first time conversation, or even in the context of sensitivity to, let's say, your carbon footprint and you have preferences, it's the appreciation and the utilization of these data points to make your experience more meaningful is what you've consented the enterprise to use your data for, not for them to go retarget you without your permission somewhere else. And therefore that is the difference. What we are talking about is first party data, which is coming in from your consent back data. I can see
Yeah.
a follow-on question as well, right, Ranjit, in the same broad sphere, which is
Yeah.
where do you
But I think
draw the
Aditya,
line between?
when you look at that, I think there's one important aspect also, if you could talk to, when it's non-consented data, is there a way of anonymizing it using it? That's something the financial services industry, I understand, has done it for a while. So maybe that's something you can talk to also.
Yeah, see, I think this is a subject in itself, and there is a lot of nuance to this. But to put it very simply, I think the point is if you step back and look at where all of this originates from, right? And to me, a lot of the times the easiest way to look at a problem is from first principles and look at how this entire thing originated, right? And what are we talking about here? The way I look at this is that a majority of the use of data, right, and why we've had to draw lines around consent and all of that is because people basically started looking at in 1960s, maybe there would be a billboard with a message. And then as the digital era unfolded on us, they said, oh, I have these ads that I can run. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put up digital billboards to target people. And then as folks started getting access to surrogate information through platforms where you could advertise, you basically said, let me follow the people that I want to with some surrogate metrics. And that is where third party, second party data started getting used, right? Cookie retargeting and all of that stuff happened as part of that. With the CDP, what you're saying is this is not about going out there and following you. This is about making sure that I recognize you when you're talking to me. This is not about going and popping my head every time you talk about something else and I want to be part of that conversation, right? And that is fundamentally the difference. You're not it's when you're at my home and you're talking to me, I'm making sure that it's conversational, it's relevant, I understand everything that you've done about me. I am, you meet me at the, let's say you meet me in the living room and I say, hey, hi, how are you? You come back and follow me into the kitchen and say, hey, how are you? Who are you? Right? And that's not how you treat a guest, for example. Whereas if you're sitting somewhere else in somebody else's yard and me popping up there and saying, hey, how are you? Do you want to come into my house? Is a completely different thing. Right. And that's really what we're talking about. This is first party consent to conversations that are happening in my scope of control. And that is where I'm delivering the traveler experience. The whole angle to data where the lines get crossed is in second and third party data when you are going outside your interfaces.
And I think we are out of time. I see one more question, but I just wanted to offer it up there. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn with follow-up questions. I'd be happy to engage there and get you responses. I'll volunteer on behalf of the other two gentlemen as well that will get you responses. Aditya, the question was around data privacy, GDPR. How can the sector manage data when they have personalization? Right. We'll take that and we'll have to close it. Unfortunately, we're over time, I think now.
Yeah, so no difference again. I think to me the response is the same. I think all of these, you have to look at these, you will find these regulations limiting if you're essentially using data for retargeting, which is not data that you have, but dependent on some third-party data to retarget and force fit yourself into a conversation. These regulations, I think, are general guardrails when you're looking at first party consent data, because when you are looking at your own data that consumers have given to you for making their experience better, these regulations become non-limiting in the sense that you are by design then respectful of what it means to get that consent. And this comes very naturally to all of us in our personal lives, but the moment we switch to our business hat, these regulations tend to look constraining because we are looking at using data for interruption. We're looking at data to force fit ourselves into conversations. I think the moment we switch our gaze and look at them as consumer experience and something that's going to be a sustainable relationship rooted in trust, these regulations don't really look constraining. And we are, again, just to kind of reinforce, we are looking at all of this from the lens of consent backed first party data or zero party data that consumers will give you access to. But again, like Ranjit said, we're happy to connect, talk. We're all available. I'm sure George, Ranjit, me, all of us are on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out. Happy to pick these conversations, and these are really, really exciting conversations to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time. It was fun talking to you. I hope you had some value out of it. And like Aditya was just saying, feel free to reach out in case I could never shy away from an engaging conversation. So let me put it that way. Thanks, George and Aditya.